Hey, I'm Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, we're back with the channel Favorite History Matters, and this title popped up on my feed, and I had to watch it. And the title of this video is, What Happened When Kamikaze Pilots Failed or Wimped Out? So we hear about the bravery of these kamikaze pilots, but what happens if they didn't do their job? And it's one job, right? Anyways, we'll find out. All right, original video link is down below. Make sure you're supporting History Matters. Give that a view, like, subscribe, and let's get started.
You had one job. Most people have heard of kamikaze
said.
pilots, young men who were tasked with crashing their planes into enemy warships. These pilots could, ideally, accurately target important parts of ships and do more damage than a traditional bombing run. Also, it was believed that the display of a kamikaze pilot willingly sacrificing themselves for Japan would demoralize the enemy. Now,
I agree. Like I talk about this when I talk about psychological warfare in when I teach, and talking about that and we'll see if they get to some of this stuff. The use of kamikaze, especially at the end of the war. Now, kamikaze meaning pretty much the plane, once it's done with fuel and its weapons and stuff like that, using itself as a weapon and committing suicide in an attack using their plane, right, as a weapon. But the psychological effect on that after, especially when you're getting towards the end of the Pacific War, when you're getting like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, you're dealing with the psychological aspect of this, where it's like you're fighting an enemy that is not just like okay with dying, they're planning on dying. And that hurdle, right, you have to overcome. Surrender is not an option, right? And thoughts like this may have influenced, decisions like drastic ones, like using an atomic bomb, right, when you're dealing with an enemy such as this.
Now, the effects of kamikaze attacks are well debated, but something not spoken about is what happened when they failed.
Yeah.
What was to become of a kamikaze pilot that either missed or wimped out? So, some background.
Good question.
As of 1944, things weren't exactly going great for Japan, and the only hope of preventing America from defeating them was to destroy or at least cripple their capital ships, most importantly, their aircraft carriers.
Right.
Simply attacking the ships with conventional means was too costly for Japan. As such,
And again, by the end of the war, they're running out of fuel, which is a major reason why the attacks on Pearl Harbor happened, because the United States had put an embargo on Japanese oil, because the Japanese got an incredible amount of oil from the United States, so they live or die by it.
Taking young pilots,
Literally,
sticking them into planes loaded with explosives, and then ordering them to fly into critical parts of enemy ships was deemed to be a better strategy. The men chosen for this weren't just some random chaps, but were some of the most gifted pilots in Japan. The training was harsh, but the rations were much better, and culturally, kamikaze pilots were revered. Pilots were expected to reflect on death in their time off to prepare them for their upcoming mission.
I've heard comparisons that a kamikaze pilot and that kind of thing was like maybe should be considered by their culture as like a modern day samurai, right? No surrender in this, and there's honor in taking one's own life, that kind of thing.
Yet for some, this preparation and love for Japan wasn't enough to get them to introduce their face to the deck of an American warship. So what happened to failed kamikaze pilots? Well, many were shot down before they even completed their mission or could get there. Some hit the wrong part of the ship or missed completely and fell into the ocean where, providing they survived, they'd be captured and taken to a prisoner of war camp.
We're also saying failure in the fact that like you just don't bring down the ship at all. Why don't you die with that anyways?
And before continuing, there's a common misconception that kamikaze pilots were only given half a tank of fuel to ensure they couldn't come back, which isn't true.
I haven't heard that
there were
before.
legitimate reasons for a pilot to turn around, and losing a well-trained kamikaze to a malfunction would be a waste. And the entire reason why Japan turned to this strategy in the first place was
like, yeah, you need it to work. It's not just some thing to save face, right? In the face of defeat. It's like it's a logistical like as an objective, right? As like logistical importance to actually use your plane as a functional weapon.
Was because their resources, including pilots, were limited. So pilots that turned around because of technical issues or bad weather would face no consequences because it wasn't their fault. Yeah. Better luck next time, and there was going to be a next time.
Right,
Those that returned due to less easy to confirm reasons like enemy resistance or the inability to find their target would be chastised. And the number of these cases was alleviated by undertaking kamikaze attacks in groups and also getting the pilots drunk so they wouldn't think too much about the whole dying thing. However, when only one survivor returned, it looked quite suspicious suspicious, but remember,
Yeah,
kamikaze
Tojo.
pilots were valuable resources, and so Japan wanted to utilize every single one of them. Thus, no punishment, back out you go. Now, there was a limit to how often someone could return. For example, there was one pilot that returned 9 times before he was executed for cowardice. For most pilots...
It's like, yeah, it isn't out of your hands 9 times.
So returning from a suicide mission was, to an extent, expected, and in many cases not something that would get you imprisoned or shot. Like all resources during the Second World War, Japan had to conserve and make the best use of its kamikaze pilots if it were to compete with the industrial might of the United States.
Yeah.
And given
Even
that a
then,
single
it's
kamikaze pilot could put an aircraft carrier out of commission for months, they were seen as something not to be wasted. Hence why returning kamikaze pilots weren't often punished. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you for watching, with thanks to my Patreon supporters whom you can see on screen now.
Heck yeah. All right, final thoughts. All right, again, great little tidbits of information, again, about something so fascinating to see in the modern era is this idea of, these suicide pilots in modern warfare, right? With established, industrialized armies, right? But again, it was also indicative of really the beginning of the end for Japan in a lot of ways, once you start having to resort to these sort of things. Because again, you saw this stuff more towards the end of the war when supplies were running low. But yeah, anyway, so in summary there, yeah, so if you came back because of like a technical problem or something like that, then it was seen as all right, but you are going to go back. Otherwise, they showed there's like executions and stuff for being a coward. So anyway, a fascinating part of history there. All right, this was a lot of fun to watch. If you got more History Matters videos you think I need to watch, and there's a ton, you let me know. All right, and with that, we'll see you next time. Bye.